It's been suggested over these last days that we have to become divine psychologists, but it's also been suggested that we cannot begin to become divine psychologists until we've become divine scientists, physicists and alchemists, which means to say that we have to have come to learn and understand the workings of life, to learn and understand the ways of existence and the laws of life, and learned and understood the ways of the chemistry of life. But how can we know that we've arrived at that place where we can claim all three of these? And there is that old story, that old Zen story about the shogun who was given a little monkey which he adored. He loved to see it capering around and let it play wherever he was. And there was an occasion when the shogun had a great reception where he invited all his samurais to attend, as well as other dignitaries, pundits of different kinds. And during the reception, the shogun challenged his samurais, "Catch my monkey." And these samurais chased this little creature all over the place, but none of them could pinpoint this little monkey. And so the shogun was very frustrated. Here were all of these so-called famous swordsmen, samurais who could not even catch a little monkey. But it so happened that the Zen master Hakuin was attending this reception. So the shogun called Hakuin to him and said, "Well, you purported to be this Zen master and know the ways of life. You take care of the monkey." So the Zen master Hakuin merely stood still where he was and raised his staff, and immediately the monkey became quiet and subservient. Of course, the shogun asked him, "How did you do that?" But that's for you to know the end of that story. But how do we become divine psychologists, having claimed our knowledge of the workings, the laws and the chemistry of life? And there's a Sufi story that points the way for us. And it's a story about a man a long, long, long time ago who, having mastered the ways of existence, attained a great degree of perception relative to the ways of life, who, through that knowledge, came to know how to make fire. So his name was Noah, and Noah set out on a journey to bring his knowledge and demonstrate it to communities along the way. And each community that he stopped at and demonstrated this art took up their understanding of it in different ways, until he finally came to a community that was so freaked out by this demonstration of fire that they took him and killed him. But many, many decades later, there was a Sufi with a group of his students who went on a kind of pilgrimage, and it so happened that they stopped at these communities that Noah had followed the path on, and they found that each of the communities had taken up the knowledge of the making of fire in a different way. The first community they visited, it was found that only the priests were allowed to use fire, and with their knowledge they kept the people en masse enslaved and kept the knowledge of the making of fire to themselves. And then came a community that only worshipped the accoutrements of fire, but didn't utilize the fire itself. And then a third community that had forgotten the ways, but worshipped Noah and the image of Noah because he represented that knowledge. And then a fourth community had made the knowledge and Noah into a kind of legend, which was taken up by some of the people and not taken up by others. And then there was a fifth community that had actually taken the knowledge of how to make fire and benefited all. But they too were caught in the limitations of what fire did for them. So all of the students of the Sufi master, when they came to the end of the journeys, discussed amongst themselves, and they said, this is fire. Fire is fire. That all of these people are utilizing the knowledge in different ways and not to their benefit. They should be taught about fire. So the Sufi master said to those students, if you dare and face the consequences of what you do, let us begin our journey again. So they went to the first community where the priests were in charge of fire, and they were invited to go to a ceremony where this was demonstrated by this elite. And after this, one of the Sufi students said, I feel compelled to tell these people. So he stood up and explained to them that fire did not belong just to the few, that it should benefit the all. But the priest said, seize him! And they took him away, and this student was not seen again. They went to the second community, and again one of the students stood up to explain to this community that it was not just about the accoutrements of fire, that it should be utilized. But he too was told, you come into our community and we have the ways that we follow here, and you come in, you can't even speak our language properly, and you try to tell us what to do. So they were bundled out of town. And so it went on in each of these communities, when each of these students stood up and tried to teach and demonstrate to each of those places what true fire was, what the benefit of fire was, and even demonstrate to them in one way or another they were shunned and sent away. Even with the last community who knew how to use fire were unwilling to be taught those other levels at which fire could be made a benefit to all. So when the Sufi master gathered all of his students together, he asked them, "Well, what have you learned from this experience?" How do we become divine psychologists? What is it that this staff in the first Zen story represents for us in the way of stories, to give us confirmation that indeed we have become and brought together all three? We have mastered the ways of existence. We have our staff. But to become divine psychologists, so-called, what does this story point us to? What does it demonstrate for us as we explore this possibility? What was the lesson that the Sufi master was demonstrating for us? Psychology. Existence, life, mind.
Is it like people are out where they're at, just understanding that they're perfect the way they are, you don't have to try and teach anyone anything in existence?
Mm-hmm.
What was I saying?
Fire. What does the fire represent in this story?
The light inside us, the divine that I am, that you are, that we are, is in all of us.
Okay. I'm not out of a dream.